I sat at the long, polished mahogany dining table, my hands resting in my lap. The air in the room felt heavy, like it always did when my father-in-law, Arthur, was present. He sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak with precise, aggressive movements. My husband, Julian, sat beside me, looking down at his plate. Julian was a kind man, but in this house, he was a ghost. Arthur cleared his throat, a sound that usually meant a lecture was coming. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice booming. "I've decided that you're moving to the logistics department on Monday. The current manager is retiring, and you need to learn how to handle the heavy lifting of the family business." Julian flinched slightly but didn't look up. "Dad, I'm doing well in design. I thought we discussed this." Arthur let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Design is for people who don't want to make real money. You're a Sullivan. You do what the company needs." I took a slow sip of water, keeping my face perfectly calm. Arthur glanced at me, his eyes full of disdain. "And you, Elena," he added. "Stop encouraging his little hobbies. He needs a leader, not a cheerleader." My heart did a familiar lurch, but I forced a smile. I had learned a long time ago that fighting Arthur with words was a losing game. He thrived on noise and conflict. He loved the feeling of someone pushing back so he could crush them with his influence. "I just want Julian to be happy, Arthur," I said quietly. Arthur slammed his fork down. "Happy? Happiness doesn't pay for this house or the cars you drive. My money does." I looked at the expensive paintings on the wall, thinking about how Arthur viewed everything in terms of ownership. He thought he owned the company, he thought he owned Julian, and he certainly thought he owned me. What he didn't know was that while he was busy shouting at the world, I was busy building a world of my own. For the past 3 years, I had been working late into the night on a project that had nothing to do with the Sullivan name. I had used my maiden name and a series of private servers to keep it hidden. To Arthur, I was just the quiet daughter-in-law who stayed at home and shopped. In reality, I was the sole architect of a software system that was currently changing the industry. The dynamic between us had been set since the day I married Julian. Arthur saw me as a trophy wife who had trapped his son. He never missed an opportunity to remind me that I came from a middle-class background. During the holidays, he would gift me expensive jewelry and then tell the entire family how much it cost, as if he were buying my loyalty. Julian tried to defend me at first, but Arthur controlled the family trust and Julian's salary. Slowly, Julian's spark began to fade. He became a man who asked for permission before he spoke. It hurt to watch, but I knew that if I spoke up too loudly, Arthur would find a way to cut us off before I was ready. I needed time. I spent my mornings at the local library or in my small home office, coding the backbone of what would become Apex. It started as a simple tool for supply chain management, but it grew into something much bigger. I didn't want fame, I wanted leverage. I wanted a way to give Julian a life where he didn't have to look at his father every time he needed to breathe. Tonight, after the dinner from hell, I retreated to my office. The blue light of my monitors was the only thing that made me feel powerful. Julian came in a few minutes later, looking exhausted. "He's right, Elena," he sighed, sitting on the small sofa in the corner. "I should just take the logistics job. It's easier than fighting him every day." I walked over and knelt beside him, taking his hands in mine. "Julian, you're an incredible designer. If you give this up now, you'll never get it back. Just give me a few more months." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "A few months for what?" "We live on his whim." I smiled, but I didn't tell him the truth yet. I couldn't. If Julian knew, he might accidentally give it away. He wasn't good at keeping secrets from Arthur. Arthur had a way of digging them out. "Just trust me," I whispered. He leaned his head against mine, and for a moment, the weight of the Sullivan name felt a little lighter. I went back to my keyboard, my fingers flying. I had just received an offer from a global conglomerate to buy a licensing agreement for Apex. The sum was staggering. The next morning, the phone rang early. It was Arthur. He didn't even say hello. There's a board meeting at 10. I want you to bring Julian's suit to the office. He forgot it here during the fitting. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30. Arthur, I have an appointment, I started. Cancel it, he snapped. The company is more important than whatever lunch you have planned. He hung up before I could respond. I didn't have a lunch planned, I had a meeting with my legal team to finalize the Apex documents. I felt a surge of cold anger. He treated me like a courier. I decided to go, but not because he told me to. I went because I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized his empire was built on sand. I grabbed Julian's suit and drove to the Sullivan headquarters, a glass tower that dominated the skyline. As I walked through the lobby, the staff nodded to me with pity. They saw me as the woman who had to do Arthur's bidding. I took the elevator to the top floor, the throne room, where Arthur ruled his kingdom. I entered the boardroom quietly. Arthur was at the head of the table, surrounded by men in gray suits. He gestured for me to put the suit on a chair in the corner. About time, he muttered. He didn't introduce me. He just went back to his presentation. As you can see, Arthur told the board, our shipping costs are rising because we haven't integrated the new automation software. We've been trying to negotiate with the developer of Apex, but they are being difficult. They won't even meet with us in person. I stood by the door, listening. My heart was thumping against my ribs. Who is the developer? One of the board members asked. Arthur scowled. Some anonymous group called The Architect. They operate through a law firm. But don't worry, I'll find their price. Everyone has a price. I almost laughed. My price wasn't money, it was freedom. Arthur had no idea that the person he was trying to bully into a deal was currently standing 10 feet away from him, holding a garment bag. I slipped out of the room before he could say anything else, my mind already spinning with the final pieces of my plan. When I got home, I called my lead attorney. Move the timeline up, I said firmly. I want the final contract signed by Friday. And I want the public announcement to happen on Monday morning. My attorney sounded hesitant. Elena, are you sure? The Sullivan Group is the primary competitor for the licensing rights. If you sell to their rival, you'll be starting a war. I looked out the window at the manicured lawn Arthur paid for. The war started a long time ago, I replied. I'm just the one ending it. I spent the rest of the day looking through our personal finances. We had nothing that Arthur didn't give us. Our house was in the Sullivan Trust. Our cars were company leases. Even our savings account was monitored. It was a golden cage, but the bars were still made of iron. I felt a pang of fear. If this failed, we would be on the street. But if it worked, Arthur would never be able to tell Julian what to do ever again. I had to believe in the code I had written. It was solid. It was the best in the world. That evening, Julian came home with a box of his things from the design department. He looked like he had been defeated. I'm in logistics now, he said flatly. Dad made the announcement today. He told everyone it was my idea because I wanted to step up. I felt a lump in my throat. Seeing him like this made my resolve harden into diamond. Julian, I need you to listen to me. I'm going to do something on Monday. It's going to change everything. People are going to be angry, and your father is going to be the angriest of all. Julian looked confused. What are you talking about? Are you leaving me? I hugged him tight. No, never. I'm saving us. Just stay calm, no matter what you hear. Don't let him see you sweat. He didn't understand, but he nodded. He was too tired to argue. We spent the weekend in a strange sort of silence. I watched him wander through the house like a stranger. He didn't know that by Monday, he would be the one with all the choices. I stayed up until 3 a.m. on Sunday, sending the final encrypted files to the buyers. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, cold wind. I dressed in a sharp, tailored suit I had hidden in the back of my closet, one I had bought with my own earnings from freelance consulting. I didn't look like the quiet Elena anymore. Julian was already at the office, likely suffering through his first day in a department he hated. I drove to the Sullivan headquarters, but I didn't go to the lobby. I went to the hotel across the street where the press conference was being held. The rival company, Vanguard Systems, was announcing the acquisition of Apex. The room was buzzing with reporters. I sat in the front row, wearing large sunglasses. The CEO of Vanguard, a woman named Beatrice, took the stage. Today, she announced, Vanguard is proud to announce that we have secured the exclusive rights to the Apex system. This software will revolutionize global logistics, and it was created by a single, visionary developer known as the Architect. The room erupted in questions. I felt a surge of pure adrenaline. Across the street, Arthur was likely watching the news, realizing that his biggest opportunity had just been snatched away by his greatest enemy. I waited until the press conference ended, then I walked straight into the Sullivan building. I didn't wait for the receptionist. I walked past the security guards, who were too busy watching the news on the lobby monitors to stop me. I took the elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, the office was in chaos. People were running back and forth with files. Arthur's voice was screaming from inside his office. I walked to his door and pushed it open without knocking. Arthur was standing behind his desk, his face a deep shade of purple. He was throwing papers on the floor. Julian was standing in the corner, looking terrified. Arthur looked up and saw me. "Get out, Elena." "Not now. Some coward just sold Apex to Vanguard. I'm going to find out who it is and sue them into the ground." I walked to the center of the room and set my briefcase on his desk. "You won't have to look very far, Arthur," I said, my voice steady and clear. He stopped mid-shout, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the original patent filing. I laid the document on the desk. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes scanning the page. At the bottom, in the section for the inventor's name, it didn't say, the architect. It said Elena Marie Sullivan. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Arthur's hand began to shake as he picked up the paper. This is a joke," he stammered. You're a housewife. You don't know the first thing about software." I leaned over the desk, meeting his gaze. "I've been building this for 3 years, Arthur. Right under your roof. While you were telling me I was a cheerleader, I was building the tool that your company desperately needed to survive. And I just sold the exclusive rights to Vanguard. For more money than you've made in the last decade." Julian gasped from the corner. He walked over, his eyes wide as he looked at the patent. "Elena? You did this?" I turned to him, my expression softening. "I did this for us, Julian. You don't have to work in logistics. You don't have to work for him at all. We're done here." Arthur's shock quickly turned into a terrifying rage. He slammed his fist on the desk, making the pens jump. "You traitor," he screamed. "You used my house, my electricity, and my son to steal from me. I'll have the lawyers take every penny. That patent belongs to the Sullivan Group because you're part of this family." I didn't flinch. I had expected this. "Actually, Arthur, I checked the Sullivan Group's employment contracts and the family trust bylaws. I never signed an employment agreement. I'm not an employee of your firm. And since I used my own private funds and my maiden name for the incorporation, the trust has no claim to my intellectual property." I pulled out a second folder. "This is a formal notice of resignation for Julian. Effective immediately." Arthur looked at Julian, his eyes pleading and angry at the same time. "Julian, tell her she's crazy. You're my son. You can't let her do this to our legacy." Julian looked at the patent, then at me, then at the father who had spent his life belittling him. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the old Julian return. Julian stepped forward and took the resignation letter from my hand. He looked at Arthur, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look down. Dad, Julian said, his voice surprisingly firm. You didn't build a legacy. You built a prison. Elena just gave me the key, and I'm taking it. He turned to me and smiled, a real, genuine smile. Let's go. We walked out of the office together. Arthur was still screaming behind us, calling us ungrateful and promising to ruin us. We ignored him. As we walked through the lobby, the staff stared at us in shock. They had heard the shouting. They saw the way we were walking, heads high, shoulders back. We walked out the front doors and into the bright afternoon sun. Where are we going? Julian asked as we reached the car. I looked at him and felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Wherever we want, I said. We have enough to start your own design firm. A real one. No Sullivan strings attached. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Arthur tried everything. He hired a private investigator to find dirt on me. He sent dozens of legal threats. He even tried to call my parents to reason with them. But I had prepared for every move. My legal team was top tier, and the contract with Vanguard was ironclad. They were more than happy to protect their new asset. Julian and I moved out of the Sullivan mansion that same night. We checked into a hotel and began looking for a place of our own. It was strange to be homeless, with millions of dollars in the bank, but it felt like the greatest adventure of our lives. Julian spent his days sketching again. The light was back in his eyes. He admitted to me that he had been depressed for years, feeling like he was a failure because he couldn't meet his father's impossible standards. I thought I was the problem, he told me one night. I didn't realize the system was rigged against me. I held him, knowing that the system was finally broken. Arthur's company began to struggle almost immediately. Without the Apex software, they couldn't keep up with Vanguard's new efficiency levels. Their shipping partners began to jump ship. I watched the stock prices drop from my laptop in our new penthouse apartment. I didn't feel joy at his failure, but I did feel a sense of justice. Arthur had treated people like chess pieces for decades. Now, he was losing the game because he had underestimated the quietest player on the board. One afternoon, Julian's mother, Martha, called me. She was a soft-spoken woman who had spent 40 years being Arthur's shadow. Elena, she whispered into the phone. I just wanted to say, thank you. I've never seen Julian this happy. Arthur is miserable, but for the first time in years, the house is quiet. I think I might leave him, too. I was stunned. I had never imagined Martha would find her own strength. You're always welcome here, Martha, I said. It turns out that freedom is contagious. By the second month, Julian had officially opened JS Design Studios. He hired 3 of his old colleagues who had also been mistreated by Arthur. They were working on a project for a sustainable housing development. It was exactly the kind of work Julian loved. I remained the primary consultant for Vanguard, working from home and managing our investments. We were a team. One evening, we received an invitation to a charity gala. Arthur was the chairman of the event. Do you want to go? I asked Julian. He looked at the invitation for a long time. Yes, he said finally. Not to brag. Just to show him that we're still here. That we're not afraid of him anymore. We arrived at the gala late. The room was filled with the city's elite. When we walked in, the music seemed to dip for a second. Everyone knew the story of the software heiress and the son who walked away. We saw Arthur at the far end of the ballroom. He looked older. The anger that usually fueled him seemed to have turned into a hollow bitterness. Arthur tried to ignore us at first, but eventually, we were cornered near the bar. He looked at Julian's tuxedo, then at the diamond necklace I was wearing, one I had bought for myself. I hope you're happy, Arthur sneered. You've nearly destroyed a 50-year-old company. All for what? A little bit of pride? I looked him in the eye. It wasn't for pride, Arthur. It was for peace. Your company is failing because you refuse to innovate and you refuse to treat your people with respect. That's not my fault. That's yours. Julian stepped forward. Dad, we're not here to fight. We just wanted you to know that we're doing well. If you ever want to have a relationship that isn't about business or control, our door is open. But the Sullivan Group stays out of it. Arthur looked at his son, and for a fleeting second, I saw a look of regret in his eyes. But then his mask of arrogance returned. I don't need a relationship with a quitter, he spat. He turned and walked away, his back stiff and lonely. We left the gala early. As we drove home, Julian was quiet. You okay? I asked. He nodded, looking out at the city lights. I am. I realized tonight that he's never going to change. And for the first time, that doesn't make me sad. It just makes me feel sorry for him. He has all that money and not a single person who truly loves him. I took his hand. He has his legacy, I said softly. Julian laughed. No, he doesn't. You took that away when you signed your name on that paycheck. We got home and sat on our balcony, looking out at the world we had built together. I thought about the thousands of lines of code I had written in the dark. I thought about the way Arthur used to look at me like I was invisible. I realized that being invisible was actually my greatest advantage. It allowed me to move without being seen, to build without being interrupted, and to win without firing a single shot. A year later, Apex had become the industry standard. I was invited to speak at a major tech conference. I stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of faces. I talked about the importance of independence and the hidden potential of people who stay in the background. After the speech, a young woman came up to me. She looked nervous. Mrs. Sullivan, she said. I'm a developer, but my boss keeps taking credit for my work. How did you find the courage to step out? I looked at her and remembered the feeling of being Arthur's courier. You don't need courage to start, I told her. You just need a plan. Build your value in the dark. Make yourself so essential that when you finally step into the light, they can't afford to lose you. And if they can't appreciate you, you'll have the power to walk away. She thanked me, her eyes bright with a new kind of fire. I realized that my story wasn't just about me and Arthur. It was about anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The Sullivan Group eventually filed for restructuring. Arthur had to sell the family mansion to cover the debts. He moved into a smaller penthouse, still complaining to anyone who would listen about how he had been betrayed. Martha did leave him. She now lives in a quiet cottage by the sea, and we visit her every month. She's learned to paint, and her house is filled with colors instead of the dark mahogany of Arthur's world. Julian's firm is thriving. He's become a leader who listens, a man who encourages others instead of crushing them. We have a life that is full of noise, but it's the right kind of noise, laughter, collaboration, and the sound of people building things together. Sometimes, I still sit at my computer late at night, just to feel the rhythm of the code. But now, I don't do it to escape. I do it because I love it. I am the architect of my own life, and the signature on my work is finally mine for the whole world to see. Looking back, the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the fame. It was the moment I saw Arthur's face in that office. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the truth. He had spent his life believing that power came from shouting and controlling others. I proved that true power comes from intelligence, patience, and the ability to walk away from a table that no longer serves you. Julian and I often talk about that dinner at the mahogany table. It feels like a lifetime ago. We've replaced that table with a simple oak one in our dining room where we host friends and family. There is no head of our table. We all just sit together. I've realized that the greatest victory you can have over a bully isn't making them lose, it's making them irrelevant. Arthur isn't a villain in my story anymore. He's just a man who missed out on knowing his own children because he was too busy counting his coins. As the years passed, the Sullivan name began to mean something different. People stopped associating it with Arthur's greed and started associating it with Julian's designs and my technology. We redefined the legacy on our own terms. I eventually started a foundation to help women in tech get their start without having to rely on corporate gatekeepers. Every time I see a new patent filed by one of our scholars, I feel a sense of pride that far outweighs any paycheck. I've learned that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, because you never see them coming until they've already won. Julian and I have a daughter now. We named her Maya, and we're raising her to know that her voice matters, even when she's whispering. We tell her that she doesn't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most important. She has Julian's creativity and my focus. She is the best thing we've ever built. One rainy Tuesday, a package arrived at our office. It was from Arthur's estate lawyer. Arthur had passed away in his sleep, alone in his penthouse. There was a small box addressed to me. Inside was an old, dusty computer component, the first one I had ever helped my dad fix when I was a kid. There was a note in Arthur's shaky handwriting. I knew you were the one who fixed the server in 2018. I just couldn't admit it. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. I sat there for a long time, holding that piece of plastic. He had known I was capable all along, but his pride wouldn't let him celebrate me. It made me realize how much energy he had wasted trying to keep me down. I didn't cry for him, but I did feel a sense of closure. The war was officially over. I put the component on my shelf, a reminder that the truth always finds a way out, even if it takes a lifetime. Julian took the news of his father's passing with a quiet grace. He went to the funeral, stood by the casket, and said his goodbyes. He didn't feel the need to shout or be angry anymore. He had moved so far past Arthur's shadow that it couldn't even touch him. We didn't take any of the inheritance, we directed it all to charity. We didn't want anything that had Arthur's strings attached. Our life was already full. We had our work, our daughter, and each other. As we stood at the gravesite, I looked at the Sullivan family plot. It was a cold, grand place. I realized that Arthur had spent his life building a monument to himself, while we had spent our lives building a future. The difference was clear. One was made of stone and was destined to crumble, the other was made of ideas and love, and it would live on through the people we helped. Tonight, I am sitting in my office once again. The house is quiet, and the city lights are twinkling outside the window. I am looking at a new line of code, the beginning of a project that will help small businesses compete with the giants. It's funny how life works out. I started this journey as a failure, in my father-in-law's eyes, a quiet woman with no real job. Now, my signature is on the paychecks of hundreds of people who are building a better world. I take a sip of my coffee and smile. Julian walks in and kisses the top of my head. Coming to bed, architect, he asks. I nod and close my laptop. I don't need to stay up late to escape anymore. I have everything I ever wanted. I am Elena, the woman who took the biggest decision away from the man who tried to control her, and in doing so, I finally found myself. The silence isn't a sign of weakness, it's the sound of a plan coming together.